Good evening. Welcome to this evening's edition of Chop It Up NC. I am Reverend Dr. Paul McAllister. I am the moderator for Chop It Up NC. We have also Shante Anthony, who is our Director of Community and Coalitions, or I should say Community Engagement and Coalitions for the North Carolina Democratic Party. Thank you, Shante, for helping us access this program tonight and for your work behind the scenes. You do such a wonderful job, and we are appreciative. At this point, I'm going to ask everyone if they would mute your computers, or rather mute your microphone. That would be Teresa, for one, and maybe others. If you would mute, then we will get started tonight. Our guest is Carolyn Thompson, Judge Carolyn Thompson of the North Carolina Court of Appeals, running for a retention of that seat that she was appointed to by Governor Cooper on September 13th. I'm going to read her campaign bio. I think this is the best way to introduce you, Judge Thompson, and then allow you to give us an introduction in your own way. On September 13th, 2023, Governor Roy Cooper appointed me to the North Carolina Court of Appeals. This seat is up for re-election immediately, and I do not have a primary going into the general election on November 5th, 2024. One only needs to read the news to see that the judicial branch of North Carolina is vulnerable to the same divisive and partisan politics that the legislature has been promoting for a decade. Respect for the Constitution, the rule of law, and precedent have been ignored and reversed. True justice is independent of party affiliation, divisive ideologies, and social differences. I, Judge Carolyn Thompson, have taken and believe in the oath to consistently uphold our laws and Constitution. There's more that I can read here, but I think I'll stop reading and let you speak. It's good to have you this evening.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity and for reading the bio. And thank you to everyone who's decided to join us tonight to talk about the importance of our court system and making sure that we protect democracy through the judicial candidates on the 2024 ballot. As you've heard, my name is Carolyn Thompson. I am the sitting judge of the Court of Appeals. There are 15 judges in the Court of Appeals, and there are 3 seats on the ballot in 2024, and I am the incumbent for seat number 12. And everything that you've just read is my truth, that I am running to make sure that we have a balanced or begin to have a balanced court again.
Judge Thompson, I'm going to ask you if you can back off your mic a little bit. I think we have a little bit of distortion. And so I'm not sure if you're using a lapel mic or a mic on your desk in front of you. Okay, that might be a little bit better. Let me explain to everyone how Chop It Up goes and really why this is important. Thanks to members of our state legislature in Raleigh, we continue to have these conversations. Initially, Chop It Up was a series of conversations with men of color. But we're in a campaign season, and the issues that affect men of color certainly affect the entire population, as Judge Thompson has said. And so we've opened up this dialogue to include not just men of color, but citizens of North Carolina. And we are allowing various candidates to speak. We would hope that we would continue this conversation regarding the issues that impact men of color, but certainly one such as Judge Thompson, you have made rulings on the lives of many people throughout the state of North Carolina. And so I want you to eventually, as we get into this conversation, talk about what you see are the critical issues that face North Carolina, that face communities of color, and then also speak to men as you perceive and recognize some of the challenges that we have in the state of North Carolina. So this is the framing. After we have a few comments from Judge Thompson, we will certainly open up the floor for dialogue so those of you who are attending can ask her questions. We know that this conversation is being recorded, and so we anticipate that there will be many viewers beyond tonight who will be able to see this over and over again, even beyond the election cycle that we are currently in. With all of that being said, I am very honored to be here with you, Judge Thompson, and all of you as guests. It is a privileged seat to occupy, to have all of these candidates streaming to Chop It Up NC. And I'm under no illusions, or rather, I don't have any delusionary thinking. This is not about me. This is about the candidates, and this is about the people. And what we're trying to do is flesh out some of the concerns that we should all recognize. I've read some of them, the challenges that we see today in our legislative branch as well as the judicial branch. And one would have to be paranoid or not paranoid to think that these same issues could eventually take hold of the executive branch of government. So Chop It Up is a venue for us to really mix up the ideas and make sure that your ideas, your concerns levitate to the highest levels of leadership in our state, and demand a response to the concerns that we have. Judge Thompson, you've led a very distinguished career, and I want to just mention a few things about where you served, because I don't know that I did that as effectively in the opening. You're currently sitting on the Court of Appeals, obviously. Prior to that, you were Deputy Commissioner for the North Carolina Industrial Commission. You've operated your own law office at various points in times in your career, serving also as a district court judge for roughly 9 years, and also a Superior Court judge, both in the 9th Judicial District. With all of these experiences that you have had, and you're also a minister.
Yes.
I didn't leave that out. And so when you couple your ministry with your life as a lawyer and a judge, and there's a ton of community awards that you have earned over the years. What are some of the reasons why you feel this conversation is important tonight? I've said why it's important to me and to the NCDP, but from your perspective, why is it important to you?
The truth that you've mentioned, with my 27 years of combined legal and judicial experiences, when you get to the ballot, for some reason, it doesn't weigh as much as it should. I'm running against an opponent with no judicial experience, but expected to make decisions that I've been making for over 20 some years. So I think it's important that people recognize the experience, and that what I bring to the table is not just the legal experience, but my own life experiences. I can tell you that in recent weeks, I've had to rule in a case that involved property discrimination, where a very qualified, financially qualified couple who happened to be African American attempted to buy property. And in that particular case, the owner of the property kept moving the bar, kept moving back the qualification, get this piece of paper and then come back and talk to us. Or, okay, but you have this bank verification of what you have in your bank account, but now we need you to go get affidavits from people. And just went on and on and on. And so finally, they asked for additional time to get the new thing, and they sold it from under them. Well, I've been through that. I've tried to purchase property, and the first question out of the realtor's mouth was, well, how do you intend to pay for it? And I said, I'm going to pay for it with money. But if you don't recognize that as a life experience when you're reviewing a case, you will have the position, oh, well, they just wanted to make sure that they were qualified. They just wanted to make sure that this was not going to fall through for the bank. But when you lived that and gone through it, you recognize that no, that was discrimination. But that's why this conversation is important. That I have the legal experience. I've made my bones in the courtroom, on the bench, and in front of the bench, and fighting for the least of us. And as a pro bono attorney, helping domestic violence victims who could not afford an attorney. But with that experience, I'm also a mom of African American men. I'm also a nana to biracial children. I'm also a daughter, and I'm making sure that the way I leave the bench would be better for them and for our community.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to ask you to reposition your mic once more. We can hear you, but I just want to make sure we get rid of all the little elements of distortion that may make this slightly unpleasant for those who are listening. You carry many roles, and you've mentioned those things tonight. Many of us who are on this call wear many different hats. And so what that suggests is you, in many ways, are representative of the constituents that you serve. How do you, as a judge, inform the people that in many ways, in spite of a very distinguished and high-profile career, you identify with them, that you're very much like the rest of us in some ways?
I'm going to maybe talk softly instead of in my judicial voice. Is that better for you? Is that coming across better?
Well, let's just work with it. We're fine.
Okay, let's see what we have. So for me, it has been important not just to sit on the bench, but also be active in the community. The thing about being a judge is that we have a tendency to sit on the bench and go back in chambers, and it's like the Wizard of Oz. We go behind curtains and nobody sees us again until it's election time, or when we are ruling in particular cases. And it's important for me to be active and let people know that I'm still here. Anytime you can walk into a courtroom and it looks like my family reunion, it needs to be discussed that we have work to do. And so every opportunity I get, I'm out here talking about the importance of balancing our courts. I'm thankful, I'm grateful, I am humbled by the fact that I am the only African American female right now out of 15 judges making decisions for the entire state. But it does not reflect the community. It does not reflect a balance of everyone's voice at the table.
Mm-hmm. What is the representation of African American judges in the state of North Carolina? If we look at both the lower level courts and the upper level courts, which would be the Court of Appeals and the U.S. And the North Carolina Supreme Court, what percentage of judges are persons of African American descent?
I wouldn't be able to give you accurate or percentages. I can tell you from the time I hit the bench in 2009, there was such there was so much of an uproar about the majority of us being African American, especially in my judicial district. It was very noticeable that even in the top courts, then I think Sherry Beasley, Justice Beasley was Judge Beasley on the Court of Appeals, and it hit the front page newspaper. Well, in terms of being on the Superior Court, I think we're down to 4 statewide. So something has been happening since the Obama election, that we've been turning back the hands of time and going back to a place where the bench does not reflect the community and all of us and all of our voices.
Well, this is precisely what I was sort of driving at, and you just cut right to the chase. Something indeed has been happening. We've been dealing with a backlash post the Obama election. And that means if you look at the 2008 election, we had strong turnout from the African American community. Not quite so much in 2012. And so, what do you think we need to do within the Democratic Party in order to restore those numbers to where they were in 2008 so we can restore confidence and competence in some ways in the legal system?
I think we need to stop having conversations about folks and go talk to the folks. One of the things I'm seeing on the campaign trail, or hearing on the campaign trail, is that we've forgotten about the rural communities. We've forgotten about the smaller counties. And candidates tend to focus on the Mecklenburg, the Durham, the Wake areas. But when I went to Martin County, they talked about how none of the state candidates came out to meet with them. When I went to Columbus County, they're saying the same thing there. And so I think it's about having a conversation and not talking about what we assume to be the issues. I've been in forums similar to this where there's some discussions about getting out the vote in the Black community. But here I am, a Black candidate. And I'm like, hey, here I am, use me, and not just assume that because we throw money into these communities that people are going to get out the vote. Make us visible, help us be visible, help us get the message out. It's so secret that it's difficult for African-American statewide candidates to win. If Sherry Beasley with the treasure trove and the name recognition could lose by 408 votes, it's difficult for those of us who simply want to do the job, carry the message of democracy when you can't feel like there is adequate support in getting your message out.
Yeah, and we know, and I know that you've been going on a tour with former Justice Mike Morgan, also candidate for governor, and several other African American candidates. Ben Clark, I want to mention his name, even Laura Cubbage, who's running for the Supreme Court. Still serving on the Superior Court. You've been traveling around the state to some of these rural communities with Dr. Kimberly Hardy, who's the second vice chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party. And what are some of the messages that you've picked up from these communities of color that have been somewhat discouraged and lagging behind in their voting since 1 decade ago?
I think it's about tabletop issues. You don't want to talk about something that's so, where I come from, as highfalutin as the economics of the world today and where we are as a nation. Folks want to know, how are you going to put food next week in the refrigerator? And how does my vote affect your decision on the bench based on that? Folks want to know, like, if my son is in prison and he didn't get a fair shot, what can you do about that? Or have questions about the judicial system. A lot of people don't even know what the Court of Appeals is all about. And they want to focus on advertising about the Supreme Court, but a lot of our cases stop at the Court of Appeals. It sets the precedence for the lower courts to tell them whether they got it right or got it wrong, and this is how this case should be handled, this type of case should be handled from here on out. And so I try to give examples of recent rulings. I talk about how in a particular termination of parental rights case, it was very clear to me, being a former DSS attorney, that this parent's rights were not protected by way of terminating his rights before he even got a chance to hold his baby. And just because he wrote the appeal, his appeal means just as much as a typewritten appeal hired by fancy, high-priced attorneys, and that he was going to get my attention. And when I read the record and reviewed it and saw that they swabbed him one day, found out he was a daddy within a week, and then proceeded to terminate his rights without giving him the steps that were required before you terminate a parent's rights, I was able to send that back to the court and say, go back and fix that because he's entitled to his rights as a parent. Mm-hmm. Those kind of things, that's what we talk about. Everyday matters, because people think, well, court is just for criminal stuff. No, it's making decisions that affect our community. And I often try to explain how difficult it is for judges to say what we can and cannot do because of judicial standards, that we're not allowed to say how we would rule in particular cases. So people are like, well, if I don't know where you are, where you stand, how I'm to vote for you. Well, the minute I tell you my thoughts, my personal belief systems, then it becomes record. And then I can't hear your case. I can't be the one that's going to sit and hear this case because they're going to make me recuse. And we've seen recent things that have happened when judges speak out. And so I just try to keep it basic about the issues that everyday people are dealing with and what I've done since I've been on the bench.
Mm-hmm. Several things are coming to my mind, and you'll have to pardon me if I conflate several questions. One set of questions involves the structure of the courts, of the district court and the superior court versus the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court, and whether they're jury trials or whether they're decisions made by a panel. That's one set of questions that I have. The other line of thought that's coming to my mind as we're listening to you, Judge Thompson, is your heart. What guides you morally, ethically? There's some justices that I've heard speak, and you don't get any idea from just listening to them what their passion is. You speak with a level of gravitas, a level of sincerity that really reveals something about your character. So you can take either of those two sets of questions and you can merge them, if you will. But talk to us about who you are, what your role was on the district court versus what it is now on the Court of Appeals.
So I'll try to blend that as much as I can. On this level of court, I see the record of what happened below in the lower courts. I don't hear testimony unless there's a request for an oral argument about the record that's before me. But the experience piece comes in because I've been there as a district court judge when you've got a docket of crazy numbers and you've got to get it done before 5 o'clock. And I know what the judges are trying to balance to give everybody a fair day in court, knowing full well you can't get through that heavy docket. I've been in the superior court where you have the forms that you must check and make sure that it becomes a part of the record accurately, and those little boxes that you have to check. And so when it comes on appeal because something wasn't checked correctly, trying to send it back on technical errors. As a district court judge, we call that the kitchen sink court. You hear everything from juvenile, criminal, domestic violence, mental health. In my district, we actually went over to the mental health hospital to hear cases involving involuntary commitments. So that was the kitchen court sink. And then, of course, now on the Court of Appeals, I use that experience being a trial attorney as well as a trial judge to put myself in the seat of the judge who's making the ruling and what happened in that particular instance. So with all of that, if your question is about the structure, then the Court of Appeals gets the record of what happened below. And as I'm reading, I can say, I see, I got that, I've been there, done that, or I understand why a particular jury instruction was given versus another.
Mm-hmm. So the Court of Appeals gets the record of what actually happened, and your rulings on those decisions that are appealed are procedural versus what? Well,
again, on this level, you don't have the party's actually standing in front of you, talking to you, trying to convince you about getting evidence in to create a record. And so we sit in panels of three. Typically on a monthly basis, every 2 weeks we get 15 cases apiece, and we are assigned a panel. I have two other colleagues that will sit on the bench or sit in the court with me if we have oral arguments or we have conferences, and we review the records together and we take a vote on how we believe the court should rule to affirm, find no error or error and send it back based upon the record that's in front of me. So to some it may seem, well, that's just a lot of reading and it's kind of cold. That's again where experience comes into play because of the trial experience, the trial judge experience. And for example, in that particular case, I talked to you about the TPR, or the termination of criminal rights case. Well, I mean, I was a DSS attorney and I also presided in juvenile court and DSS court. And so my colleague who did not have the same experience thought that, oh, you're trying to send a baby to jail to visit a father. And I said, no, the rules and under the statute do not require that. In fact, kinship placement is the option. He should have been given an opportunity to say, until I can get out or until I can participate as a parent, I want you to consider my relatives so that the child stays in the same bloodline. But again, if you don't know that because of the lack of experience, then you will make that kind of mistake.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so what I think I'm hearing, if I might say, is if you don't have experience at the Court of Appeals, we can end up having a very confused judiciary with rulings that are inconsistent from case to case.
And I've said this on a campaign trail, and I said, we as judges, we may not have the big mic like the governor's race or the presidential race, but we've got a pretty big pen and a lot of ink, and we affect generations to come. Our rulings actually sit in books, bookshelves and law libraries. And so when I write an opinion or I'm the author of an opinion, that carries precedence for the entire state, for the lower courts. A recent case that the UNC student of government blogged about dealt with a driving while impaired case. And so law schools are talking about our cases and our opinions. So it's pretty impactful, but if you can't get the message out that judicial races matter as much as the top of the ticket, then people will just skip over the judges and get voter fatigue and not go down the ballot. And then we've got a hot mess on our hands.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's no secret that there are those who believe, I'm one of them, that certain individuals in our state have made a concerted effort to reinvent our courts. Some even would say some want to remake the courts in their image rather than reflect what is actually written in the Constitution. So, since you have stated your commitment is to the Constitution, how do you interpret what that means in light of the challenges that we face with individuals who see the Constitution as something that can be manipulated in their image rather than reflect the will of the people?
That's the importance of getting out the message, know your judges. When I talk about our Constitution, I give an example in the Section 17. Slavery has been abolished by our state constitution, but there's a key word in that constitution, that section, and that word is accept. Judges determine and interpret the word accept. There has to be some kind of connection or link to that for people to understand, who do you want to be responsible for interpreting the word accept? That it's allowed in terms of punishment, as a form of punishment. So it's important to know the judges. It's important to know not just because of a party affiliation, but how is that judge going to interpret? the law and the Constitution.
Okay. Let me back off some of the more technical aspects of this conversation and just ask you, I think you have several family, perhaps friends, certainly colleagues who are listening tonight. What inspired you to become a lawyer, and why did you pursue being a judge?
As a child, I watched my mom, who I lost in September. I watched my mom work double shifts as a nurse. And at that particular time, my father, my mom were not in the best place, and she had, sole custody of us, my brother and Kenny and I. And as a kid, not having the things that we probably needed because of the absence of, I don't want to tell my age, so don't y'all laugh, but Perry Mason was on TV. And all I knew was Perry Mason was winning every case. And I said, when I grow up, I want to be a lawyer, and because I want to fight for kids who struggle, who need help. And I remember writing that as an essay with Ms. Adams. We had to do an essay, and I found it among my mom's papers, by the way, when I was cleaning up her house after she passed, and she still had the essay, and it was called Girl Power. And I talked about how I wanted to be an attorney, and my teacher wrote, well, you need to try it and maybe think about being something else because you don't have any other attorneys. And I remember my mom, all 4'11", putting me in the car, and we drove back up to Glenwood Elementary in Danville, Virginia, where I was born and raised. And she stepped to the teacher and said, my baby can be anything she wants to be, and you better not say otherwise. And I just knew that the fight for me, even as young as that, was that I wanted to help other kids. And of course, my family law practice focused on custody and child support issues as a result of. And I'm so grateful right now that I have a wonderful, loving relationship with my father and have come to understand so much more, even about that time as a kid. But that was my passion. That was my drive back then, was to make sure that even in the hardest of times, the most difficult times for children, the children were being protected. And so I built my career on family law issues, broken family issues. At some point, I took on the role as a domestic violence advocate because, being a minister, a lot of women were coming in the court and in the church abused. And so the ministry, Abigail's Veil, deals with domestic violence in the church, not in the community, in the church itself. And knowing that the clergy didn't know how to handle when somebody comes to the altar and say, I'm being hurt at home, or I'm being abused, what to do with that. And it just took a life of its own to start training clergy about what to do when situations like that come up. And so with that, building the ministry and also the practice on family law and domestic issues, here I am 27 years later and still trying to fight the fight just because, right is right all by itself 24/7. I don't need to add to it or take away from it. I just simply want to be the vessel to stand in my place and do my job.
Mm-hmm. And once again, the heart and the compassion and the sincerity with which you speak is so effusive that one would have to one. I would think one would not have to struggle in a great way to understand how you would rule in certain cases, certainly in domestic violence cases that might come before you. I want to talk about your mother. What type of woman was she?
Okay. My mother, Eunice, was my Moses. Um, I was just talking to my auntie today about sometimes I just want to hear a voice in her direction because
Yes.
she was the kind of woman who believed that a circle could actually fit in a square if you just had faith. And that's how she raised us. There's no such thing as can't. We weren't allowed to even use the word in her presence. And I found in my office not too long ago where she wrote on a sticky note, Win with Cat, exclamation point. My nickname is Cat. If y'all go out here and call me Cat, I'm gonna deny it, but my nickname is Cat, and that's what my family calls me. And so she was my cheerleader. She was a wonderful, wonderful inspiration and a role model. A lot of girls my age and teenager stuff going through couldn't say that their mom was their best friend. She was my absolute best friend. And we were so close that if I think about her, she would call me and then we do this Twilight Zone again, telling my age. We do this little song like do 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 because I was just thinking about her. And even now, when I think about her, I look at my phone and want to, hear her voice. But I do know that she raised me to understand that to be absent from this place is to be present with the Lord. So she is definitely, she was a gospel singer, an ordained apostle. She was a Pentecostal preaching, woman of God. And so I already know, the angels up there are sitting down because she's taken over.
Interesting. I'll tell you why I asked that question, because when you were talking about domestic violence, obviously an issue that affects women and children disproportionately in this country, many are afraid to talk about that issue, much less have an opportunity to make rulings on that issue. You've gone so far as to not just talk about it and make rulings on it, but to even remind others and teach and educate others how critical it is, so that there is more, there's more balance between what's happening in society and in the courtroom. And as we think about that as a typical issue, there are many other issues that remind us of this imbalance that we see in society, between society and the courts. And some say that that is a real threat today to our democracy. And let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. And you may not be able to speak to this directly, but perhaps indirectly. There's a certain individual who is campaigning for the office of president, who is consistently finding himself going in and out of courtrooms, who believes that because he served in the office of president, that he should be given a pass. And there are many, unfortunately, who are more than willing to give him that legal pass to do whatever he wants to do if that individual happens to be reelected. And that mentality, that attitude, that disposition becomes normative in our society. What do you see as perhaps a way back off of that ledge? Because I see it as a huge problem in terms of what happens in democracy. How do we fight our way through all of that? Not telling people how to vote, not suggesting to people how they should vote, but to recognize objectively the challenges that we have in society when it comes to law, order, truth-telling, integrity.
I think people have gotten to a place now that they don't want to talk about issues because of a backlash. Like, we are afraid to have a conversation for fear of being labeled some way or another. I encourage you to continue to push the envelope, to put the issues before us, and not just go into our corners and say, well, it's my vote. I'm only concerned about how I vote. We have this idea that if we disagree, somehow we're the enemy, when we really have more in common than we have differences. I'm concerned about the same things that the average informed voter is concerned about. Now, does that mean that somehow I am supportive of the person that you're talking about? Or does that mean that I'm anti the person that you're referring to in your question? My job is to educate and inform. I can start right now with a cell phone. Go through your contacts Go to the people that you know. Don't assume people who come to your dinner and put their knees under your table that they're ready and informed to vote. Make sure that they understand if they haven't voted in a while that their names have been purged. Deal with the small things and start the conversation to build up and be continuous about it. Don't just start talking about it at election time, because everybody's talking at election time. Everybody's looking for a bumper sticker. Everybody's looking for the microphone to come to them so they can have an opportunity to tell you their platform. It's our responsibility to talk to our family members, our friends, go to our cell phones, and we can send on a text in 2 minutes. We have a job to do, and it's not just up to a party on a national level or on a local level. We can take back the voice, the soul of our state, if we just simply do what we have to do and not rely on others.
I'm going to open up the floor here. If you have a question, those of you who are attending tonight, simply use the raise hand feature, or you may put your question in the chat as well. Last week, or rather 2 weeks ago, the InterFaith Caucus hosted a forum entitled Faith and Democracy: How We Got Here and What's Next. And it was a conversation that, quite frankly, was designed and intended to be completely nonpartisan, educational, informative, and inviting for all, because we realize how important it is for people to understand, why are we so polarized as a society? Why aren't we seeing the voting numbers that we need to see so that we have confidence, or that we can inspire our colleagues to have confidence in the fact that their citizenship matters, especially in times of sharp divisions and social conflicts. And so I just want to put this plug in to those of you who are on the line tonight and those who will be listening, that Faith and Democracy is on the line in this next election. Judge Thompson, as a minister, as a judge, how do you balance your roles when you sit in the robe, in the room with your colleagues, knowing that some of them may feel the complete opposite of you on different issues? How do you balance those responsibilities that you have?
Yeah, I'm reminded of a couple of times on the bench, the lawyers, once they found out that I was an ordained minister, they would come in and say words like, Judge, we're just asking for a little mercy. We're just asking for a little grace. And I get tickled by that because, okay, you've done your homework and you're trying to, feed into where I am. But the truth of the matter is, it would be unfair for me to impose my religious belief, my faith system, on the cases that are before me. I can't do that under the law and constitution that I've taken an oath to. My faith is my faith, and I cannot be a preacher from the bench. And in fact, the one I serve, Jesus said, render unto Caesar that which is due Caesar, and that to God unto God. So when I zip up, I'm Judge Thompson, and I'm going to hear your case objectively and not impose my faith system on anybody. And then people want to talk about the evangelical extreme right versus left and all of that. I am not a judge of people and their decisions, their lifestyles, if you will. I'm there to look at the facts, look at the evidence, apply the rules, the law, and the Constitution. And so it would be unfair and it would be biased, the very opposite of what people expect of judges to come in and say, because I believe this way, this is the way I'm going to rule. And we've seen in maybe 60 to 90 days ago, it's public record, it's public knowledge that, one of my colleagues made a ruling about terminating a woman's right before she could even push. She hadn't even delivered the baby. But because in his ruling, he said, because life begins at conception, that her rights would be terminated before she even gave birth. And that was so, it created such a whirlwind that it had to be pulled from the books. So that's not what you're going to get out of me, if that's the question that you're asking.
It is. It gets to the very heart of the question of how ideology predetermines how you make decisions, or how ideology and ideologues with whom we all confront in various courses and stages of life, how we deal with them, and try to form relationships and bridge those divides. Let me ask you this, and I do see a question in the chat from Kimberly Davis. I'm going to get to it. In terms of relationship building as a judge, do you see your role as one that requires you to foster relationships when you see that someone is about to make a decision that will have a deleterious or harmful impact upon the people? Do you use your skills to reach them, if you will, to talk to them, to communicate with them, to help them understand why they should be thinking along different patterns of thought?
Okay. Can I also just piggyback a little bit on my last answer about the faith question? I don't mind sharing with you and this audience that before I zip up the road, I'm already on my knees asking for wisdom and understanding before I hit the job. And that's necessary for me. When I'm having conversations with my colleagues and say that we don't agree on how to handle a particular case, it's about communication. It's about an ability to say, I don't agree with you, and here's why. Here's what the law says, and this is how I interpret it. I'm not going to be a pulpit bully and say it's my way or no way. It's important that we're making a decision that impacts the state, folks' everyday lives, not just file numbers with names on it. When we say that this is how the case should be handled, it holds a generational impact. And so we have to flesh these things out by way of conversation. If it's clear to me that, okay, we just simply don't agree, and I'm willing to do what's called a dissent. And I have done that quite often since I've been on the Court of Appeals. If I just stand my ground, stand firm on what I believe the law, how it should be applied in a particular case.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let me thank you for clarifying. And we know that you are a woman of prayer, and it's good to know that you bring a prayerful disposition into every conversation that you have with your colleagues. So Kim's question, Kim Davis, and Kim, you may have to speak and remind us of what it was we were talking about when you made this comment. But she typed, I find that the presence of emotional abuse, so we're talking about DV, emotional abuse is unnecessarily embedded in Black men to accept, overlook, not cry about it. What is your experience in dealing and ruling in matters as such? How would you educate and support a strong agenda to change this manner of thinking? Okay, I may not have read the question. I read the words. I'm not sure if I read them poetically, but in any case, Black men, domestic violence, emotional abuse, how do you educate and support a strong agenda to change these issues?
Well, first of all, domestic violence doesn't discriminate. It's not just a Black man issue. It's not just a Black woman issue. It does not discriminate against gender. Men are abused as well. It's just more difficult for men to have a forum to express that my 4'11" wife is wailing upside my head with a pan, and I'm afraid of her. And quite frankly, the system is kind of skewed toward listening toward to women and children, because 95% of abuse happens to women and children. So I don't want to leave this conversation thinking it's all a Black man issue, nor is it a woman's issue. And what I do to educate, and it reminds me of a heated discussion I had with one of my judicial colleagues when I was a district court judge. And he came from the old school, and he said, if I don't see blood or broken bruise, I'm not giving a domestic violence order. And we had some conversations. And so it's important for me, when I'm talking about domestic violence in the trainings and the workshops that I do, that emotional abuse is actually sometimes more harmful than the physical, because the emotional gets down into your Noah, it gets down into from your ear gate to hear constantly, you're nothing, you're worthless. I should have never married you. Or the act of pretending that you're going to be hurt, or self-harming yourself so that the person will stay in the relationship. That cycle of power and control is very real in the emotional side of it. So it's not always the physical hitting, pushing, or damaging furniture and stuff like that. It's the emotional. I've often had to counsel women who really do need the second voice of a therapist because of the substantial emotional abuse that has come from months and years of being harmed in that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. So Kimberly, I hope that is responsive to your question. Are there any other questions that we have tonight before we begin to wrap up this conversation? I don't see any in the chat, and I'm looking for hands raised, and I do not see them. But we have about 5 minutes, and so I'm going to push this issue again, Judge Thompson, regarding faith and democracy. We know that democracy implies or suggests the rule of the people. And the way that the people rule is to express their will at the ballot. There are those who are seeking to distort what happens at the ballot through gerrymandering. And North Carolina is unfortunately one of those states that has been a target zone over the last 10 years, if not longer, in terms of gerrymandering. And so we're looking at a state legislature, for example, that will go from a likely 7-7 tie, and that's what it is now, if you're looking at those who are representing us in Capitol Hill or on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., in the House of Representatives, most likely to a 10-3 at best, or the 10-4 or 11-3 split. That doesn't necessarily bode well for democracy. As a judge, are you affected by gerrymandering? And if you are not, because this is a state race, what are your thoughts? Are you free to express your thoughts about gerrymandering, since it has been said by the U.S. Supreme Court that it is an issue that is non-justicial, right? That the courts
says, but we all know that it's not true.
All right.
These are the kind of issues that will typically come to the high courts of the state, where I sit, and then also in the Supreme Court. So if the direct question is, does it impact me as a voter? Absolutely. And I'm hoping that gerrymandering, when you say that, can be such a put off word. If we could just break it down and tell people what it means, because I'm sure that folks on this call, you're already gamed up. You know what you got to do on election day. You've got to vote. But be prepared to have a conversation about the importance of the vote and what it means to dilute the vote, and what's happening in your community to the average voter. They're hearing so much negativity. If you could just empower them again but can you try one more time to vote? Because this election, for real, this is the one that's going to decide for generations to come. And be it gerrymandering, be it women's rights, being the, taking away money out of public schools, those issues, whatever you can hone in on is your specialty to bring the people to the polls physically, not just get them registered, bring them to the polls, make it your business to do so.
Mhm. That's a wonderful way that's a wonderful appeal. It's a wonderful way to end this conversation. And I want to thank you for your patience tonight. I know we had some technical issues, a few glitches here and there, but you've answered so thoroughly, so completely. And I might say also elegantly. So we appreciate you and thank you for your friends who I see who weren't very vocal, but I can tell they're very interested in supporting their candidate, and so we look forward to supporting you, Judge Thompson, come November and even beyond November. We know that great things are going to come from this woman of faith. So we thank you, and we will come back in a few weeks with another announcement about who we will be interviewing, with whom we will be speaking, and the issues. I'm going to invite you to come back at some point later in the year. If you're willing to do that, maybe in August or September. If you'll come back, at that point, we'll be closer to the November election. It'll be critical to hear more of what you have to say, what you've learned from the campaign trail that you're on, and the things that we need to be giving increasing attention to as we approach that great day in November. Until then, everybody, we want to thank you, and we bid you farewell and good night.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
And this is Shantae. I'm also going to say it's exciting to be able to say for the first time we really endorse our candidate that is on. We at the Democratic Party, we don't endorse in primaries, and you are not primary. So we are definitely endorsing Judge Thompson, and we want to make sure that we see her on the bench come November.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shantae. All right. Good night, everybody.
Everyone that's joined, feel free to check on Mobilize. We have a Black History Month program that will be taking place on February 8th as well. And you might enjoy that. Okay. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening, everyone.